and welcome to the Delivering Value and Assurance to Your Clients digital event with Zarina Nakvi, Chartered Management Consultant and Founder and Director of Maxima Associates, and Nick Warren, Chair of Professional Standards Committee of ICMCI. My name is Ellen and I'm an events executive here at CMI. I will shortly be handing over to Zarina, who will be starting the session today. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen. We shall answer as many as we can. Today's session is being recorded and it will be shared with you along with the PDF copy of the slides. Now over to Zarina to begin.
Hello, good morning everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for what is an Institute of Consulting, a webinar, which is personally, I find that very exciting. I sit on various CMI boards representing and pursuing the profession, the professional needs of management consulting. And this ISO presentation is another innovation that we want to bring to the profession, and it's an international qualification, which is accreditation. Sorry, it's not a qualification; it's an accreditation, which is extremely exciting. To contextualise what I'm going to say, I sit on the London IC committee. I'm also representing management consultants. I sit on the regional CMI board, and then at a national level, on the Institute of Consultants Advisory Council. So what I want you to know is I'm deeply embedded in the profession, not just to earn a living, but to further it as a profession, which we are coming to now. There are various innovations coming into the profession, which will give us a better standing in the market. Which brings me to the need. Why is there a need for an ISO 2700, which is what this particular webinar is about? And some of the questions have already sort of highlighted what I'm going to say next, and that is it, what's it for, what's it about? It's a methodology for creating, as the title of this webinar says, value and assurance to your client. For me, one of the worst things that can happen is I go into a room and somebody says to me, "What do you do for a living?" And it always sticks in my throat that I have to say management consultant. I can now say I'm a chartered management consultant, which is fabulous, because otherwise you'd go into a room and say, "Hands up everybody who's a consultant." And half the room would put their hands up, but actually they were unemployed and they were looking for a job, which is not what I do or what I'm sure you do. So the ISO 2700 is a great starting point in differentiating professional, committed management consultants from those people who are just popping in and out of it and actually causing quite a bit of disruption to the profession. So it's useful for people entering the profession as a starting point, and it's absolutely useful for people who are already experienced, because it takes you through a system which clarifies to the client what you're going to do, what the outputs are, what you're agreeing to do. Have you done it? And it takes away all of that, oh, the consultant said this and the consultant said that, but they didn't deliver it. For me, from a commercial perspective, fantastic. So when Nick Warnes, who you'll hear from later on, first demonstrated it to me, I think I might have stood up and cheered. It was wonderful. So for him to better contextualize what he's going to say, we're going to do a little bit of a quick poll to see, in best marketing terms, who our audience is. So there is a live link there's a link in the live chat, which I think you can see now, which if you click on, I would be very grateful if you'd go through to the poll so that we can ask you a few questions and assess who you are. Therefore, what you need. Excellent. So the first question, are you a member of IC? IC obviously being the Institute of Consulting. How many of you are members? Nothing's, oh, okay. 100% of you are not members of the Institute of Consulting. Okay, thank you. Shall we do the next poll? Oh, there are. Okay, sorry, I've misunderstood that. So 33%, 67% no. Okay, well, that's encouraging. How many years experience have you as a management consultant? Less than a year is A, B, 1 to 3 years, C, over 3 years. And I've paused because I got it wrong last time, but it would appear that, oh, no, didn't pause long enough. 25%, that's very exciting. That's a superb split. Okay, I think that's probably it. Should we have the next question? So, clearly, main reason for interest in this ISO. Is it A, to build professional confidence, B, add to knowledge, C, grow your business, or D, something else? And if it's something else, if we've got time, you may want to open that up in the questions later on. Excellent. Grow business. I like to see that. Excellent. Very good. Fantastic. Thank you. Should we do the next slide, or is that the last one? That's the last one. So I'm going to hand over to Nick Warren, who will take you through the ISO and explain it in greater detail. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us in this webinar. We're going to talk about the ISO 20700 standard and the self-declaration checklist that ICMCI has developed in order to make best use of the standard for delivering value and assurance to clients. So thanks very much for answering our poll. That's very, very helpful in knowing the audience that we're talking to this morning. And please don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. We want to allow as much time for Q&A at the end of the session. But we are going to be talking about standards. That can be a bit of a dry and dusty topic. So if you think I'm getting a bit too standards geeky and going into too much detail, wasting too much time, please put a message in the chat box to tell me to get on with it. I don't mind how blunt you are, just make the language presentable in public. So let's get on with it. On the next slide, we'll just talk about what we're going to cover today. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the standard itself, why it was developed and what's in it. Then we'll talk about the self-declaration checklist that ICMCI have developed to help consultants use the standard correctly. But then we'll get on to the bit that I'm sure you really want to know about, which is about training and certification. When can you get trained? How much will it cost? And so on. And then lastly, I want to give you a bit of feedback that we've had from consultants and trainers who are using the checklist and the standard, gained from the training sessions we've run and from a forum that we held with our trainers and consultants who are using the standard. So some useful tips and tricks about using the checklist and promoting it with your clients. Okay, so on the next slide, I just want to explain to you the background of how the standard came about. The International Council of Management Consulting Institutes, or ICMCI, is the body that represents the profession around the world, and obviously the UK Institute is a member institute of ICMCI. And one of the objectives, a key objective of ICMCI, is to develop standards and guidelines that promote high standards of professionalism and ethical behaviour for management consultants. And this is the job of the committee that I lead, the Professional Standards Committee. So we're involved in developing standards for personal competence, like the Certified Management Consultant award that ICMCI gives, but also for the process of consultancy and for the ethical standards and professional conduct. So we have a variety of standards and guidelines that we've developed. But we found some time ago, based on feedback from client community, that there was actually a need to overcome some of the issues that were tending to damage the reputation of the profession. These centered mainly on an inconsistency of approach between consultants as to how assignments could be carried out, and also very much a lack of understanding from the client community about what management consultancy is, what they could expect from a consultant, how they could appraise the quality of service that they were getting from a consultant. And so we decided that we needed to develop an international standard that actually defined good practice for the process of delivering a consultancy assignment. And therefore, we persuaded the International Standards Organization, ISO, to develop a standard. And then we sat on the technical committee, which within ISO is the means that standards are developed, to help put together a standard using feedback from clients, from consultants, from academia, various other stakeholders, to put together the ISO 20700 standard, which was published late in 2017. But then on the next slide, you'll see that following the publication of the standard, we realized that actually there was a need to develop a tool to help consultants use the standard properly. One of the issues that can sometimes happen with standards is that they can be wrongly applied, wrongly used, and that's very damaging. So we worked on the development of this checklist, the Project SelfDeclaration Checklist, which provides the best practice for applying the standard in a consultancy assignment. And I'm going to talk about details of the checklist later on. But first of all, I want to start talking about what's in the standard in some detail. But just to let you know on the next slide that having developed that checklist, we're now training trainers in member institutes in the 50 countries that are members of ICMCI. We're training trainers who are then accredited to train consultants in their country. So in the UK, obviously, it is the IC who will be providing the training using the accredited trainers that have been trained to deliver in the UK. For those countries, just of interest to anybody listening from outside the UK, for those countries that don't have a member institute, ICMCI has a virtual institute, the CMC Global Institute, and that institute provides the training in countries where there is no actual member institute of ICMCI. So, I mean, in summary, we're going to talk about training in more detail later on. Training will be available through the IC and CMI for consultants to get trained in the use of the standard and the checklist in due course. I'll talk more about that later on. So let's move on now to the next slide to actually give you a bit of information about the standard itself. And first, some background as to what the standard's all about before we get into the detailed content. First of all, it's a guideline. It's not a normative standard like ISO 9001, for instance, where you can be externally assessed, you can show compliance to all the clauses of the standard, and you get an external certification. ISO 20700 is not that sort of standard. It is a guideline for consultants and clients to use in order to set the framework for the process of delivering the consultancy assignment. So it provides a framework for consultants to use based on common good practice of delivering consultancy to clients. Like I said before, it's been the standard's been compiled using input from all of those who are key stakeholders in the consultancy profession: the clients, the consultants, consulting bodies, representative bodies, academia, and so on. The standard and the checklist are universally applicable to all types of management consultancy providers. So it doesn't matter whether you're a consultant in a large company, a small partnership, an independent sole trader, maybe an internal consultant, maybe you're a specialist consultant. The standard and the checklist are applicable to whatever type of consultant you are and could be used by whatever type of consultant you are. It's flexible in application to all different client situations. So it can be used for public sector consultancy, private sector, third sector, and it doesn't matter what sector the client is in, the standard can be applied. Most importantly, it's not a straitjacket. It does not limit the innovation and differentiation that we know are absolutely key to running a successful consultancy assignment. Neither does it tell you how to run your consultancy business. It's concerned with the process of delivering a management consultancy assignment to achieve the right outcome, to add value to the client, and give assurance to the client that the assignment is being run in the best possible way. And therefore, it's actually as useful for clients as it is for consultants. And this is an important point because it does mean that it's important for us to actually promote the standard amongst our client community as well. Because the whole point of the standard is to help understanding between consultants and clients about what consultancy is and what it does and what it aims to achieve. So that's a key message. So the fact that it gives a common framework for clients to appraise consultants and evaluate their work also means that it removes any sort of misunderstanding on the part of clients about what consultancy is and what they should be expecting to get out of a consultancy assignment. Most important, it's about the process of delivering a consultancy assignment. It is not about personal competence, although personal competence does come in as part of one of the clauses of the standard itself. But the important thing to note is that personal competence, the ability to do the consultancy work, to have the knowledge, the experience, and the practice, is one part of a partnership with ISO 20700 as the process part of doing the job. So it's essential for a consultant to have both of those capabilities: personal competence and the use of the correct process using the standard ISO 20700 in order to deliver value and assurance to the client. Okay, let's move on to the next slide and have a look at the standard itself. You can see only 17 pages in the standard, so it's not a massive tome that you can get lost in. It's written in very simple language, unlike a lot of other standards. But what does it contain? Typical standard, scope and normative references at the beginning. But there are four key parts of the standard that I just want to highlight this morning. The first of which is that section 3, the terms and definitions. This is a really useful glossary of terms that consultants use and that clients might not understand. And so this is a great way of consultants and clients getting on the same page and understanding what each other's talking about. The second key content of the standard are those 12 policies that are set out in the principles, section 4. These 12 policies are like subject headings that cover all the key aspects that you need to consider in a consultancy assignment. So it talks about things like project governance, consultant capability, protecting confidentiality, protecting IP, risk management, all those sort of things that are key elements of doing consultancy properly. And then the next sections, the 3 sections, talk about the 3 main phases of a consultancy assignment. The contracting phase, which is where the consultant and the client reach agreement about exactly what service is going to be provided, how it's going to be done, what it's going to cost, etc., etc. And then the execution phase, where the actual consultancy service is delivered. And finally, the closure phase, where between consultant and client, they close off the project, making sure everything has been completed properly to client's satisfaction. And then the consultant withdraws from the client at the end of the project. Finally, the 4th key content of this standard is in the annexes, where some really useful examples are given of some of the elements to consider in consultancy assignments. For instance, examples of who might be stakeholders in a consultancy project, guidance on how to manage conflict of interest in a project, guidelines for risk management, and particularly useful for clients, some criteria for them to use to evaluate a consultant's capability to do the job for them. So that's the content of the standard. That's what's in it. And now to move on the next slide to talk about the self-declaration checklist. In other words, the tool to apply all of those guidelines in the standard in the best possible way to make sure that the standard is applied properly in consultancy assignments. The checklist has been designed to include a reference to every clause and subclause of the standard. So it covers everything that the standard is requiring in its guidelines. So that by using the checklist as a tool in an assignment, both the consultant and the client can be absolutely sure that every key aspect has been considered, and some decision has been made as to what action will result from that consideration. This is a very important element of the standard and the checklist, is that although every aspect needs to be considered, every clause and every subclause needs to be considered, the consultant and the client can decide between them and agree between them exactly how much detail needs to be gone into. So the completion of the checklist, the use of the checklist, can be adapted to accommodate different types and sizes of project, always on the basis of an agreement between consultant and client. So in other words, for example, you might talk about a very simple project, let's say a one-day diagnostic study carried out by one consultant for a small client. It's a very simple job. It's a very straightforward, fairly predictive approach to be taken. Maybe the consultant and the client know each other very well. They've worked together before. It could be that very simply there'll be nothing more involved than maybe an email from consultant to client setting out what's going to be done, what the expected outcome will be, what the deliverables will be, and what it'll cost. And then a return email from the client to the consultant saying, I'm happy with that, let's go ahead. And that's it. That could be all that is actually recorded at the contracting phase. And in the execution and closure, it might be nothing more than the simple diagnostic report, which could even be verbal, or it could be PowerPoint presentation, or it could be a full written document. That's up to the agreement between client and consultant, how much they want to go into detail. On the other hand, a much larger project, let's say a business transformation project for a large international company, many consultants involved in many countries, then there's going to be much more detail. And it could be that the amount of documentation will be extensive and very detailed. The point is, you can adapt the use of the checklist according to the type of project, according to the relationship with the client, but it's all based on the individual agreement between client and consultant for the assignment, according to those 12 key policies contained in the standard. Now, the next slide goes on to explain this in a little bit more. And obviously, look, this is a very brief and superficial overview this morning. And of course, if you go for the training, there's much, much more guidance and training on how to use the checklist, on what's in the standard and so on. But just to give you a flavor of what's involved, on this slide, on the left-hand side, you can see an extract from the template of the self-declaration checklist. And this particular extract here deals with the first phase of the assignment, the contracting phase, with a subclause defining what is the outcome of the contracting phase. In other words, what documents are going to be involved in this contracting phase. And you can see that it might be just a quote or a proposal. It could be a full-blown contract with terms of reference, or there could be other documents involved as well, things like a non-disclosure agreement or something like that. And then the other part of the table allows for notes to be made. So you might put in there, if it, let's say you're just going to have a proposal for the project, then you might put the title of the proposal, the date it was submitted, and so on. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see three colored boxes that indicate the way that the standard and the checklist have been set out to illustrate the adaptability of it. So there are three, if you like, three levels of detail into which you could go on the checklist according to whatever is agreed between client and consultant. At the first or the highest level, you're really just giving a definition or the titles of the agreed documents, such as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, just the bare titles of what the documents are. But it could be that it's agreed between the consultant and client to go down to another level of detail where you might be putting the headings within those documents. So within the proposal, for instance, going to the second level of detail, you might be saying, but the proposal will some background information on the project, some assumptions that have been made about the project. There might be a time plan of the project. There might be definition of the different roles and responsibilities of the people involved. So just the headings of those topics and policies that would be included in the documents. But then it may be in a much more complex project that client and consultant agree to go to yet another level of detail, which talks about much more of the actual content under those topic headings, those policy headings. And so the consultant and the client can agree how far they want to drill down in the detail of the documents and records that they want to have within the project. Again, to emphasize, it's an agreement between client and consultant. Every clause, subclause of the standard has to be considered, but the outcome of the consideration will be different according to the agreement that consultant and client make between them. I'm sure there'll be some questions about this in more detail in the Q&A, so we'll try and get onto that as soon as we can. But now let's get on to the part that I think you will have all been waiting for. On the next slide, we can start talking about the opportunities for training and certification for consultants in the UK. There will be 2 courses run by ICCMI early in 2021. And I can tell you now that those courses will be run on February the 10th and February the 17th next year. We haven't quite fixed the dates when I put the slides together, but now we have it confirmed. Training will be on February the 10th, February the 17th. They're public courses that anybody can register for. There'll be 1-day courses. They'll be delivered online, and they'll probably comprise 3 2-hour sessions with some time during the day for casework, for case study work in between. But there'll be some flexibility in this, depending on what we identify as the needs of the trainees. The cost is going to be £250 for institute members, £350 for people who are not members of the institute, but that fee of £350 will include 1 year's membership of the institute. And that would give non-members a chance to really try out all the benefits that they can get from being a member in terms of training, networking, and so on. And there will also be a possibility for in-house courses for medium and large consultancy practices, which can be arranged by contacting one of the trainers, the accredited trainers, directly through the institute. The thing to be said is that all the training is carried out through the Institute of Consulting. And any registrants do have to show that they are a bona fide consultant, and this is something the Institute checks up on and has to provide an attestation form to ICMCI for all the trainees to make sure that the training is being given to bona fide consultants and not those that Zarina talked about earlier on, those who are out of work just looking for the next job. So bona fide consultants only, but it doesn't matter whether you're brand new or very experienced. All levels of maturity of consultants will find this training useful. The outcome of the training is that you receive a certificate showing that you are trained to use the checklist to apply the standard. And also you get 2 logos that you can use, one to show on your publicity material and so on, and maybe put into your proposals to show that you're trained in the use of the standard, and also one that you can use to self-declare a project on completion, which can be used maybe as part of the testimonials to the project. Obviously, because this is a guideline, not a normative standard, you can only self-certify, if you like. You can only self-declare the project. But the other main advantage that you get from the training and the certification is that you will then be registered on the ICMCI website. The next slide shows what this means and what you will see on the ICMCI website. By the way, the URL of the website is www.cmc-global.org. That's cmc-global.org. And on that website, under the tab entitled Find an Expert, you'll see all the accredited trainers and all the trained consultants listed by country. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see all the countries that have trainers accredited and trained consultants. On the left-hand side, you'll see the list of accredited trainers for the UK. You'll see that there are 7 of them altogether, all of whom are accredited to provide the training to consultants. And in the middle at the bottom, you'll see it's cut off, but it actually shows the list of trained consultants in the UK. And that number is growing all the time. Globally, the number of accredited trainers and the number of trained consultants is growing almost day by day. We already have over 100 trained, accredited trainers around the world. So there is already a large community working with the standard, working with the checklist, making clients aware of the benefits they can get by requiring consultants to use the standard and the checklist. So lastly, last slide to show is some feedback about using and promoting the checklist. One of the things that we found from our training courses is that it doesn't matter whether you're a brand new consultant or whether you're experienced and you've been doing consultancy for years. Everybody finds the training useful. For new consultants, it provides a framework for them to be sure that they're doing the job properly, in the light of the fact that they don't have that much experience. So here is, a checklist that you can follow religiously to make sure you're doing the job properly. For those who are experienced, almost without exception, experienced consultants have said, yeah, I was doing that sort of thing, but now I see that there is a formal framework, and it's going to help me to make sure that in my experience, I don't get a bit too blasé and forget something. So the checklist is very helpful to me in making sure that even though I know it all, I don't forget anything. I don't get anything wrong. So useful for experienced and new. One of the things we've found has been most useful is for consultants to start using the checklist the first time they meet with a client, and to actually start doing all their pre-work fact-finding and diagnostics, the pre-diagnostics, using the checklist as a guide. So gradually filling it up as they go along, identifying the client's needs, identifying the client's attitude, what they're after, what their culture is, and so on. So it's a very useful document to use throughout the whole of the pre-contract process of fact-finding and diagnostics, and then into the planning stage, into the proposal and the contracting phase, and so on and so on. So really useful to use right from the outset. Consultants are finding it really useful to put in their publicity material, in their proposal documents, as a sign of assurance to clients that the job's going to be done properly. So they're including that on their website, in emails they send out, using that trained-in logo that's available to trained consultants. The other thing that I talked about at the beginning was the need for promoting this standard as well, because it is important for the client community to understand the benefits of the ISO 20700 standard as much as it's important for the consultants to be using it. So there's a lot of promotion going on, firstly by ICMCI themselves through their website and through that Find an Expert tab particularly. Webinars are being run, partnerships are being built with organizations like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, who are now building in ISO 20700 training to their consultancy training courses in developing countries. Our own IC through CMI is promoting on the website webinars like today's one, the newsletters and client community awareness. But it's also important for us as consultants to publicize and to promote the standard and the checklist as well, using our own publicity material, our emails, mentioning it in our proposals and so on. So basically, I mean, that's the end of the formal presentation. The call to action to you is to get on board, join the growing global community, because as client awareness grows, they're going to start asking for ISO 20700. They're going to be asking consultants, do you know about the standard? Do you use it? Do you use the checklist that's been developed? So it might be as well to get on board now and be ready for that when clients ask for it. Thanks for listening. Now over to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Nick. So we've received quite a few pre-submitted questions, but I've just seen that we have a few live questions as well. So I would like to go through those first. So the first question is from Peter, and it's, what's your take on service delivery / service failure?
Oh, interesting. What's our take on service delivery success and failure? I think the first thing we have to say is service delivery failure is damaging to the profession. And obviously it has to be avoided at all costs. But what is required for service delivery success? I think I'd reinforce something I said earlier on. Success in anything involves people, processes, and nowadays technology. So success of consultancy service delivery depends on the competence of the consultant to do the job. That's the people part. It depends on the consultant using the right process to deliver the service. And that's the ISO 20700 part. And it depends on the right use of technology. And nowadays, technology is ultra important in consultancy. I mean, we're using technology today in this webinar that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. The COVID crisis has forced many of the dinosaurs in our profession to realize they've got to get online. The only way they can actually deliver consultancy at the moment is online. So technology is key. And advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning are those bits of technology now essential to consultants as well. So let's talk about success in delivery and avoid the failure.
Yeah. Zarina, would you like to add to that?
I would actually. That's a much bigger answer than I would have given. But I would also say that that this ISO really does seek to address all of that, because for me, one of the worst things I've ever seen is where a client has expectations A and they get delivered B, and nobody really has taken the time to agree what the goal is and how it's going to be delivered, when it's going to be delivered, and then have some quality checks in between to make sure the project is on target, and where there is a risk of, say, project scope creep. I mean, how many times have we seen that? And then there's the question of, if it does creep, whose fault is it? Who pays? That's the stuff that causes massive annoyance in the process of delivery. And it's something that I think management consultants, because you start to develop a personal relationship with the client, it can get very clumsy. So in this context, I would say, if you have the ISO in place, it becomes the ISO says no, the ISO says yes. You can transfer and make it a little bit more distant and clinical in a good way by having the framework in place that measures everything, and then gives the client an opportunity to say, oh yes, I agree, or I don't agree.
Great. So this question is from Scott, and it's, is the ambition to make it normative so practices can be more accredited?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. ICMCI are currently working on a scheme, the ISO 20000 firms scheme, which will allow consultancy practices to actually have to be careful the words here, because the standard is not a normative standard, so it's not up to external certification. But the scheme will allow practices to self-certify through ICMCI, and that certification will be based on such factors as the number of consultants within the practice that have been trained in the use of the checklist, and so on and so on. So watch this space. Next year, something will be coming out about the ISO 20700 certification.
I have a question, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this name. It's Ad Luceo, and the question is, are there any signs that the public sector will make adherence to the standard a mandatory part of their selection process?
I can't answer that one.
we wish. But you have to recognise that the public sector, government and public sector, have to be very careful about inclusivity, and therefore they tend to avoid putting such restrictions on consultants submitting to carry out work. So that really the best that we could hope for would be that there would be some indication of preference for consultants who follow the ISO 20700 standard. Yeah. And that is something that we would certainly aim for through ICMCI and through IC and CMI as well.
Thank you. I would like to go through the pre-submitted questions now. And so the first one is, how important do you think clients of consultancy services think that using standards such as ISO is?
Shall I answer that one?
Yeah,
yeah. I think you probably know what I'm going to say. I think as soon as you open up, when you're meeting a client for the first time, the past experiences, and you open up and say, I know you've probably had bad experiences with consultants before, they always say yes, because they have. And as soon as you throw that one out and start talking about it, and then say, but we have this ISO where we have mutual agreement, it's very welcome. It's a very welcome thing. So I don't think I need to say more than that, because they feel comforted that the elephant in the room has been analysed, discussed, and there is something in place to avoid any accidents.
Yeah, I don't think clients will be interested in the standard per se on its own. What clients are interested in is a successful outcome. And so it's up to us to say, well, the ISO standard and the checklist are the tools that we use to ensure that you get a successful outcome. And that's the important message for the client, I think.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is, can the standard be used for any type of consultancy assignment?
Yes. It's a very simple answer, yes.
That's great. And what is the difference between using the standard and using my IC membership as evidence of my competence?
After you, Zarina.
Okay, well, IC membership is a very, very valuable thing to have because it shows your commitment to the profession, but it doesn't give you any evidence of competency or the ability to manage a project and give value to the client. So the two things together work very well, but they're not one instead of the other. They are completely separate things, and that's what I need to say, really.
Yeah. I mean, what you need is a combination, actually, of almost three things. Membership is good because as a member, you sign up to a code of professional conduct and ethics, which is an absolute must in consultancy. Personal competence, okay, then you can go for the CMC or the Chartered Management Consultant, which talks about personal competence particularly, and then ISO 20000 adds the process side of the job as well. So to me, they all go hand in hand.
Great. And so how would I be able to access additional training on the ISO standard?
Register for the training courses on the 10th and the 17th. I'm sure any of the accredited trainers would be happy to talk to you in detail as well. Now, Zarina is one of the accredited trainers, and I'm sure through the Institute you can get hold of all of those 7 and talk to them. So that you can do. But the thing is, training is going to be offered in February next year. If you're interested, register, and register now, because I think those courses are going to be oversubscribed very rapidly.
Yeah. So this is going to be the last question, and it's, is there an easy way to get hold of more information to help me implement this standard in my practice?
Same answer as before, I think. Register for the training.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, you can obviously buy a copy of the standard, which wouldn't be a bad thing. I believe that it's also possible to get a copy of the standard through the Institute. ICMCI did do a deal with the International Standards Organization to get some discounted copies. That might be something that we need to explore. But the thing is, you can get a hold of a standard, either from the BSI shop or hopefully possible through the Institute. But really, the thing to do is to get trained. And then you'll know exactly how to use the checklist. You'll get the benefit of a lot of experience of other people who've used it to get the best out of it.
There's also the additional advantage in this scenario of being registered with ICMCI, that and having the logo, that for me, when Nick first mentioned this to me, I said that is such a key differentiator. Rather than picking up just the standard and trying to follow it, you can now prove evidence to your client that you've gone through this process and point them towards the website and say, here it is, and here's the logo's evidence. So there's a lovely circular thing about doing it through this process. But then, of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? I think it's fairly obvious.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you so much, Nick and Zarina, for today's session, and thank you everyone who joined us today. If you're interested in attending those training sessions, the links are in the live chat. If you're a member of the IC community, you can access Management Direct, which has a whole range of practical resources to help apply your learnings from today. The link is also in the chat. For anyone new to the IC community, or those who haven't heard of Management Direct, it's full of personal and professional development opportunities, including 400 videos, 10,000 journal articles, 5,000 ebooks, and more. And again, the link is in the live chat. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.